The heat-in doesn't just burn the skin, it suffocates the machinery. Under the relentless Thai sun, a figure stands motionless in the garage. To the casual observer, the timing screens told a story of struggle, a 17th place finish, 0 points, and a gap to the leaders that seemed like an ocean. But inside the paddock, the air felt different. Something had shifted. For years was the undisputed king of the production-based world. A rider who could make a dance on its front wheel, defying every law of physics with a braking style so aggressive it bordered on the suicidal. But as the lights went out for his GP debut, the world witnessed something unexpected. It wasn't the explosive, tire-smoking entrance many predicted. It was a quiet, calculated, and deeply difficult transformation. The roar of anticipation surrounding the Turkish star had never been louder, yet behind the scenes, the reality was far more bruising than his fans could have imagined. This wasn't just a race, it was a collision of two worlds. A world SBK legend was being forced to choose, keep his identity and fail or kill his natural instincts to survive. What unfolded at the international circuit was a turning point, a moment where the persona died and a prototype racer began to breathe. But as the dust settled in the garage, the whispers began. Had he truly adapted, or was he simply learning how to hide a much deeper crisis? Because what the cameras didn't show in testing was a technical collapse that nearly derailed his entire career before it even started. Arrived in the GP paddock with a philosophy that had served him his entire life. I do not follow the bike follows me. It was the mindset of a conqueror. In world, he had dismantled champions by forcing the R1 to do things it was never designed to do. He was a rider of pure feel, a man who lived on the edge of the front tire. When the announcement came that he would join to spearhead their new V4 project, the hype was astronomical. The M1V4 was supposed to be the missing link, a machine with the top speed he craved but the DNA he understood. However, the first winter tests were a brutal awakening. According to insiders, didn't arrive looking to learn, he arrived looking to dominate. He spent the initial months attempting to mold the M1V4 into he wanted the same mechanical grip, the same pitching movement, and the same violent deceleration. On the brakes, he was still the fastest man on track. His signature strength remained intact. But on a GP prototype, a single strength can become a terminal weakness. By trying to ride the V4 like an R1, he was fighting the very physics the bike was built upon. The aggression that made him a god in SBK was now causing the sophisticated electronics of the GP machine to panic. He was fast in a straight line, but in the corners, he was a passenger. The tension in the garage was visible. Racing managing director watched as his star recruit hit a wall, not of concrete, but of data. Yet the real alarm bells didn't start ringing until the mechanics began stripping parts off the bike in a desperate attempt to make it legal. As the preseason progressed, a strange sight emerged from the garage. The M1V4, a bike designed to be an aerodynamic masterpiece, was being stripped naked. The rear winglets, the very components designed to provide stability and downforce, were gone. The rumor mill in the paddock went into overdrive. Was there a secret technical failure? No, the truth was far more embarrassing. His riding style was so extreme, so centric, that he was creating forces the bike couldn't handle. By loading the front end so violently, the rear of the bike was lifting and oscillating so much that it was violating technical regulations. The team had to remove the aero just to keep the bike compliant. It was a public admission of a private failure. Was attempting to impose a philosophy onto a machine that demanded precision and aerodynamic flow. The extreme setup led to massive wheel spin, destroyed tires in 5 laps, and a chassis that felt like it was vibrating apart. Inside the garage, the political tension was rising. Engineers were frustrated. They had built a prototype for the future, but their rider was stuck in the past, confirmed that was fighting the machine. Every lap was a battle of wills. The Turkish rider was at a crossroads, continue to force his signature style and risk becoming a high-profile failure or undergo a complete psychological reset. But just as the critics began to sharpen their pens, a benchmark appeared in the garage that couldn't ignore. In the world of GP, your teammate is your only true enemy. For that enemy was Jack Miller, a veteran with years of experience on and KTM, a man who knew exactly how a V4 should behave. During the early sessions Miller was the yardstick. The Australian was extracting lap times that couldn't touch. While was fighting the bike, Miller was flowing with it. For a world champion, being outperformed by a teammate is a bitter pill. But this was the catalyst he needed. The data overlay showed a startling reality. Where was overriding, Miller was trusting. Began to realize that GP isn't about how hard you can hit the brakes, it's about how much corner speed you can maintain while the aerodynamics do the work for you. The shift was subtle at first. A change in body position, a softer touch on the initial throttle opening, a willingness to let the bike run wide instead of forcing it into a tight line. In the middle of the Thai Grand, the gap between the two riders began to shrink. By the final stages wasn't just matching Miller, he was outperforming him. He finished 17th, yes, but he finished ahead of the man who was supposed to teach him the ropes. It was a psychological first blood moment. He had proven to himself that even with a wrong style, his raw talent was enough to beat a GP veteran, but the real test wasn't Miller. It was the blue bikes at the front of the field. And what the telemetry revealed about his pace compared to sent a shockwave through the hospitality. If you look only at the race results, his debut was unremarkable. But if you look at the lap charts from lap 10 to lap 20, a different story emerges. During the middle phase of the Thai Grand, the 54 was lapping at a pace almost identical to the factory stars. And Alex, for a rookie on a brand new project, matching the rhythm of a former world champion on the same machinery is nothing short of staggering. This was the clean air revelation. Away from the chaos of the opening laps found a flow. He began to moderate his inputs, trusting the M1V4's aerodynamic package rather than fighting it. The excessive wheel spin that had plagued his testing began to fade. He was learning the most difficult lesson in GP, tire management. In World SBK, you can manhandle a tire for 20 minutes. In GP, if you abuse the Michelin rear for even 2 laps, your race is over. His ability to stabilize his lap times in the sweltering heat showed a level of discipline many thought he lacked. He was no longer a stunt rider. He was becoming a consistent racer. Yet this surge in performance brought its own set of pressures. Proximity to the leaders isn't the same as racing them. Being close in pace is the easy part. Making the move, holding the line, and managing the turbulence of other V4 engines is where the real nightmare begins. And as the race drew to a close, a symbolic change on the bike signaled that the experiment was finally over. By the time the checkered flag waved in, the naked bike from testing was a distant memory. The rear aero components had returned. The setup was balanced. The rider was compliant. The return of the aero was more than a technical adjustment. It was a symbol of surrender to the reality of GP. He had accepted a fundamental truth. A GP prototype cannot be transformed into a, to succeed, the rider must be the one to change. Noted that evolution was impressive and rapid. He had moved from resistance to acceptance. He was refining his late-braking asset, learning to execute it without compromising the bike's stability. He was finding the narrow operating window where the M1V4 lives. This psychological reset is the hardest thing for a champion to do. It requires ego death. It requires admitting that the very skills that made you a king are the same ones holding you back. Didn't just change his brake markers, he changed his identity. He stopped trying to be the Sultan of SBK and started being a student of the V4. The paddock whispers changed. They no longer asked if could ride a GP bike. They began to ask when he would be on the podium. The 17th place in wasn't a failure, it was the foundation. He had survived the crisis of character. However, the transition is far from complete, and the next chapter of this journey holds a twist that could shatter his newfound confidence. As the GP circus leaves the heat of Asia for the traditional heartland of Europe, the narrative around has been rewritten. The SBK intruder has proven he belongs, but the mountain ahead is steeper than ever. His performance in Thailand suggests that the performance ceiling is incredibly high. If he can match pace in his first race, what can he do in his 10th? But GP is a sport of diminishing returns. Finding the first second of pace is easy. Finding the last tenth of a second is where careers go to die. The next phase of his development is the most dangerous, consistency. It's one thing to have a flash of brilliance in the middle of a race. It's another to sustain that intensity for 25 laps every Sunday against the greatest riders in the world. Every adjustment must now become second nature. There is no room for hesitation at 350 kilometers per hour. Has accepted the truth of the machine. He has silenced the skeptics who thought he would crash out in 3 laps. He has beaten his teammate and shadowed the factory leaders. But as he looks toward the next round, he knows the honeymoon phase is over. The paddock is watching, is waiting. And the ghost of his past is still there, lurking in his muscle memory, waiting for a moment of pressure to trigger the old, aggressive instincts. The crisis was averted. But in GP, the next storm is always just one corner away. And the world is waiting to see if we'll ride through it or be swept away by the very machine he is trying to master.